with.
On our daytime on 2, whatever happened to Britain?
So far, in our descriptions of the workings of the market economy, we have ignored the role of the state. In Adam Smith's blueprint for the new market system, the role of the state was to be strictly limited. For if markets were to liberate the forces of growth and modernization, to encourage the specialization and division of labor that is the basis of the wealth of the nation, all the old apparatus of state control must be swept away. There must be freedom in the market for goods, including foreign goods, and there must be freedom in the market for labor. But of course, the state would not wither away entirely. Law and order and the defense of the realm must be provided for. And the horrors of early industrialization must be mitigated by legislation, lest they inspire revulsion against the system as a whole. And in time, universal primary education was necessary to provide a suitable labor force. Health, too, became a matter for state concern when 25% of recruits for the Boer War had to be rejected as unfit. But despite the growing role for the state in factory legislation, health, and in education, the basic economic doctrine remained the same. Free trade and laissez-faire were the twin pillars of British success. Other countries were not convinced. Britain's obvious economic success in increasing political freedoms made an attractive mixture. But in France, Germany, and in the United States, there was considerable suspicion over Britain's eager advocacy of free trade. Manufacturing in those countries couldn't hope to compete with the Midlands and with Lancashire. If they were to catch up, new policies and new institutions would be required. Economists aren't the sort of people to whom public monuments are typically erected. Yet here in Reutlingen in Baden-Württemberg, the main square is named after an economist. And the paradox is heightened by the fact that he's an economist of whom most people in Britain will have never heard. His name was Friedrich List. And not only is this square dominated by his statue, but squares and streets all over Germany are named after him. For List was the great intellectual opponent of free trade, and his ideas were to be the main influence on German economic policy. As a young man, Friedrich List worked here in the town hall in Tübingen, and he rose rapidly in the civil service of the state of Württemberg to become a ministerial undersecretary. Now, many years later, developing his economic analysis, List argued that free trade was simply a British device for maintaining the dominance of British manufacturing industry, and that the British condemnation of state intervention in economic affairs was sheer hypocrisy. It was hypocrisy because the industrial success of Britain had been based not on free trade, but on protection. For the development of the textile industry in Lancashire had depended upon the political suppression of the Indian textile industry. Now, List didn't deny that market freedom could stimulate accumulation. Indeed, he argued vigorously for the unification of Germany in order to develop the large home market in which German manufacturing could thrive. But what was absolutely necessary was that domestic manufacturers be protected against foreign competition. Only then could the full powers of manufacturing be developed. And what was good for manufacturing was good for other sectors too. The economic health of agriculture and commerce depended on the economic health of manufacturing. List's ideas were warmly received in France. Indeed, List argued that he was simply reiterating the views of a central figure in French economic history, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Colbert was the brilliant finance minister of Louis XIV, who attempted to stimulate French manufacturing by centralizing the organization of production and strictly prohibiting imports. Adam Smith dismissed Colbert as a laborious and plodding man of business. But List argued that with Colbert, the palmy days of French industry began. The tendency to centralize, control, and direct, much reinforced by Napoleon, has continued ever since the time of Colbert, with but a few aberrant and much regretted lapses. There is in France an ingrained distrust of the workings of the free market, and the profound conviction that central direction by a small number of able persons is greatly superior to the haphazard uncertainties of the market. It is not only the centralization of economic institutions which has been inherited from the time of Colbert. Much of modern French economic thinking retains the Colbertian doctrine that it is quality rather than price which will be decisive in trade. This is really a remarkably modern sort of view, in that in modern times it is likely that technically superior products will achieve market dominance. And it's a view which is also considerably at variance with the traditional British concern with price. A contrast, perhaps, between the views of producer and shopkeeper.
In France, and it may be a difference with the English-speaking world, the market is not the only way of organizing economic and social life. For the French political and economists, state intervention is an important part of economic growth and social improvement. In this respect, even if some governments are more liberal-oriented, they did not dare to destroy the French planning system because it was a custom and it was supposed to be very useful to counteract the problem of market behavior and some problems of crisis, unemployment, and so on.
This centralizing view of economic affairs, of the need to manage markets, is today embodied in a wide variety of French economic institutions, the most important of which is the Commissariat Général du Plan, housed here in a rather modest building in a Parisian side street, where just 25 persons attempt to plan the economic destiny of France. Since the Second World War, it has been the task of the Commissariat to persuade and to enforce, to direct the industrial reconstruction of France. To this end, it disposes of very considerable powers. It can direct credit, it can raise and lower taxes, it can raise and lower protective duties, and in the past it's even used price controls to quite deliberately drive small firms out of business, leaving only the large firms which are easier to deal with. All this in the interest of a coherent economic policy.
In the French context, cultural one and political one, there is no strong bias against you see, the public sector. And this is an historical fact. In some very crucial circumstances, it turned out that it was the state which tried to promote the modernization and the industrialization of the French economy.
Most major French banks, such as the Crédit Lyonnais, are nationalized. And one of the major levers by which the Commissariat influences the development of French industry is by an indirect control over finance. Most French firms have learned that it's not worth asking their banks for a loan of any significant size without first clearing the deal with the Commissariat. And the French banks, both public and private, play a far more important role in French industry than do their counterparts in Britain. For France is the birthplace of industrial banking, a form of financial organization we usually associate with Germany. The role of the industrial bank is to lend long, to provide long-term finance for the development of new industrial projects, a form of financial activity traditionally regarded by British bankers as ill-advised or even dangerous. This new economic institution, controlling the vital lifeblood of a market system, the flow of money, was rapidly adopted in Germany. The industrial bank became the politico-economic organization for the transformation of Germany into a modern industrial state. In place of the central planning system of France, it was the great German banks which directed and persuaded.
As you perhaps know, Deutsche Bank has been founded as a universal bank 111 years ago. And since our very beginning, we are in a very close relationship to the industry, be it big companies, giant companies, and even small industries.
One can arguably assert that the larger commercial banks exerted a decisive impact on industrial policy prior to World War I and also during the 20th of this century, first by assisting the setup of and even by founding new industrial ventures. One could say the banks were using sheer venture capitalism and were predominantly entrepreneurially oriented.
This is the storage yard of the Mannesmann Company, the largest producer of steel pipes and tubes in Germany. In 1890, the Mannesmann brothers invented an entirely new process for making steel tubes. They were seamless, and unlike the old seamed tubes, could withstand very high pressures. But the brothers couldn't find sufficient financial backing to set up a production company. They turned for advice to the great industrialist von Siemens, who in turn referred them to his cousin, who was a director of the Deutsche Bank.
They were gifted engineers, but without financial means. And they addressed Deutsche Bank, and one man, personality within the executive board, they joined the Mannesmann brothers and was ready also to meet the financial requirements for the first beginning. And in the meantime, there were some very crucial stages to get through with these people, and I can tell you that was a really debacle for the first beginning, but later on, we also got the real success, and we succeeded in combination with the industrialist and the bank.
The structure of German banking today reflects its 19th century origins, as does the centralized planning system in France. Both these quite different institutional forms evolved out of the need to constrain and direct the market. It really can't be emphasized enough that in France and in Germany, the idea that the efficient organization of economic affairs can be left to the impersonal forces of the market has never received the acceptance that it has in Britain. Quite the contrary. The market is but one element to be used in economic management. And where long-term structural change is concerned, some form of centralized direction is required. The market can't be trusted.
No, we understand what the government interested is in. And we join the government also in contributing ideas, contributing financial means, and bearing the risk. For instance, there are some institutions bearing risk with the government 50-50, particularly in order to foster new ideas based on new gifted personalities, also to give them the chance to found companies and develop new products.
In Britain, it was not until the writings of John Maynard Keynes in the 30s and the explanation they provided for the disaster of depression that the case for state intervention in the economy was taken seriously, let alone generally accepted. It's the Keynesian view that the economy can and should be managed that creates an entirely new role for the state and for the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Keynes had argued forcefully in the 1930s that the then prevailing view that, apart from occasional hiccups, the market will maintain full employment was fundamentally wrong. Markets just don't work that way. Take the labour market. Cutting wages when workers are unemployed will only make matters worse. Lower wages mean lower spending power for those who have got a job, which means less demand for commodities and for labour. With respect to the market for savings, increased savings will do no good unless there is an improved prospect of profits to encourage businessmen to invest. But higher savings will mean less spending, which means less demand and less prospect of profit. What is needed is action on the side of investment. And if private companies won't do it, the state must step in. By manipulating demand, by its spending and taxation policies, the state can manage the economy to ensure full employment. Keynes' ideas appeared to be amply confirmed by the experience of economic management during the Second World War, which was run according to Keynesian principles. Then, in a 1944 white paper, it was affirmed that the government accept as one of their primary aims and responsibilities the maintenance of a high and stable level of employment after the war. This marked the most important change in the economic philosophy of British governments since the abolition of the Corn Laws. Keynes's ideas and Keynesian economists captured the treasury here after the war. But Keynes' ideas were really only accepted at one level, at the level of the overall operations of the economy. The job of government was now to maintain the aggregate level of employment by fixing interest rates and government expenditure at appropriate levels, and then to leave the rest of economic life to the market. So the structure of industry, investment policies, the development of new products and new technologies, the very future of the economy was handed over to the market. And of course, there are plenty of economists around to prove that this was a good thing. Thus was born a Keynesian ideology, the new Treasury view, a grand new synthesis in which, paradoxically, Keynes's ideas were used to resuscitate and prop up free market economics. The Keynesian ideology dominated British economic and political life for 30 years. It was the economic element in the Labour and Conservative consensus politics of the 50s and 60s. Today, the commitment to full employment has gone, but the belief that the market knows best lives on. The Keynesian ideology proved to be a device to enable the free market economic orthodoxy to survive after the humiliation of the 30s. There has, of course, been some government intervention in the workings of the market. Regional policies, for example, which persuade or direct companies to locate in particular areas, are an attempt to overcome the conditions in those regions which the market has condemned to depression and decay. Similarly, government rescues of beleaguered companies, Ferranti, Rolls-Royce, BL and so on, represent a refusal to accept the remorseless logic of the market. And while there is today massive government expenditure on health and on the welfare state, this is not part of an economic strategy. It is rather the modern extension of 19th century social reform. But intervention and discrimination as a means of positive industrial planning has not only not been practiced in Britain, it has been regarded with distaste. So the French practice of varying the tax liability or financial status of individual companies to enforce compliance with government objectives would be anathema in Britain. In France, nationalization, total or partial, has been used as a device for stimulating modernization and change. Nationalized companies such as Renault, together with entreprises mixtes, part government, part privately owned, have been the pace setters in many industries, introducing new techniques and new organizational methods. In Britain, nationalization has been a method of picking up the pieces, of reorganizing rundown industries, a service of mercy to the fallen, never a part of some general economic plan.
Now today, Britain's first national economic plan was published. It shows us just how we can pay our way in the world, how we can play the part we should continue to play in international affairs, and at the same time, how we can all enjoy a steadily rising standard of living. It's the first time anything like it has been attempted in Britain. We now know where we're going. We all have a job to do to make it work. It won't be easy, but if it succeeds, Britain will be prosperous, will be proud, and will be strong. The stagnant years will be behind us, and behind us for good. We must, and we clearly can, get our country on the move.
George Brown's attempt to recreate the Commissariat du Plan in his Department of Economic Affairs with its national plan in the mid-60s failed dismally because it had no teeth. Lacking the French control levers of key firms in major industries and the vital control over finance, it was really an exercise in wishful thinking. And even this was soon to be abandoned to the demands of short-term expediency. The reaction to the balance of payments crisis in July 1966 was yet another surrender to the power of the market. The national plan, and with it any commitment to long-term planning, were effectively abandoned. The control of finance is an essential element in a successful industrial policy. In Germany, finance has been guided by a consensus between the state and the banks. In France, the government oversees financial flows. In Britain, the allocation of finance is left to the market. But perhaps the fundamental difference between the economic organization of Britain and that of our major continental partners is that whether through the Commissariat in France or through the banks, industry associations and government ministries in Germany, their economic policy is conducted with a view toward the long run. In Britain, the short run dominates. The Keynesian ideology has resulted in a preoccupation not only with problems of full employment, which is perfectly reasonable, but with the balance of payments and inflation, with short-run reactions to the market rather than long-run use of the market.
This BBC book, which expands the main themes of the programme, is available from bookshops, price £4.95 in paperback or £9.95 in hardback. On BBC One at the moment, there's News Afternoon, followed, of course, by a look at the weather. Technical Studies follows next here on 2 at 12:40, and that's in 5 minutes' time.